Welcome to the XP42 web series, and today we're talking to Michelle Ockers at Brisbane International Airport because Dan and me decided that we need to get on a flight and come to Australia for some reason.
You didn't come to interview me, Clinton.
But then I said that maybe, hey Michelle, are you available? And Michelle's kind enough to come to the airport and sit and talk to us. Now Michelle has a bunch of learning and development experience over the last few years, and now is also a star of a learning podcast.
I co-host a learning podcast.
Co-host.
The stars are the guests. The stars are always the guests.
This is true.
Yeah?
So what was that journey like? I mean, you started off, obviously, you had a rich experience in Coca-Cola.
Well, I actually started in the military. I don't know if you know that. I spent
no way.
16 years in the Royal Australian Air Force.
As what? What were you doing?
A logistics officer.
Oh.
Yeah, so running warehouses. I was involved with the introduction of a new fleet of aircraft to Australia, the Hawk aircraft. I worked with British Aerospace for 3 years. Training was one part of what I was responsible for. My job was to make sure we could support this new fleet of aircraft. So that was the year 2000. I got out, so I'd been in straight from high school.
Oh.
Then I moved more into the business world.
So you already used to, I mean, obviously with airlines and aircrafts, it's always complex.
I'm very familiar. I'm familiar with aviation. I'm familiar with large-scale systems engineering, not as an engineer, but working in complex systems.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So obviously, what is the shift to civilian life?
It's been great.
Right.
It's been great.
Right.
I mean, the military was an amazing experience. Like, if you talk just from a training perspective, right, and skilling people up and getting them ready to do something when they need to do it, the military's all over it.
Right, because
they have to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And non-readiness means
look, and interchangeability is unbelievable. Like, you could pick someone up from the military anywhere and plonk them somewhere else, even in another NATO country's military organisation, and they would instantly know what to do and how to do it because the processes and systems are sorted. And I've got to say, that kind of drove me nuts at first when I left the military environment.
Oh yes,
because just people knowing what the hell they're supposed to be doing is a big challenge.
But is it because of the leadership component that the military obviously has, and when you come out of it, it's sort of...
It's systems and leadership, really good quality people, and I've got to say, when I can find good quality people to work with, like, that's the main thing I look for now, is good quality people who've got the ability to make things happen and are interested in being progressive.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you went to companies, post-military, did it annoy you? Like, was it annoying?
So
is it slower?
No, I don't think it is slower. But I think so. I've got this bugbear with the word agility, right? I think the word agility gets grossly misused. I think it's often excused for shit, we're making it up as we go along. Little lowercase a agility, as opposed to people who've really gotten it down pat. I think the pace of business, like, I don't know what it's like in the military now, but the pace of business now compared to the military, 18 years ago when I got out, there's no comparison. It's just so fast now. People are just expected to carry so much. I'm working with a couple of clients at the moment, learning and development teams, looking at their capabilities and are they future ready and what do we need to do to develop them. And the thing that's really struck me is just how frantically busy everyone is. And they just don't have time to step back and think, and to think ahead. And
but is that busy good or like busy rubbish? Like,
it varies because it depends on the calibre. Like, if I just talk about a learning and development perspective, it depends on the calibre of the conversations and relationships you have with the business and what sort of work you're doing. So a lot of it is just running around chasing your tail or doing things that maybe aren't highest value. So for me, it's all about what's going to add most value here. Are we working on the right things to make a difference,
So is that your approach to learning and development for companies and stuff as well? Like, how do you convince them? Because one of the things that happens with learning is that it gets relegated to the unimportant, cross cards or just send them on a training or whatever. And so how do you convince big companies, obviously you spend money and time, because there's a lot of time, is it like a big approach or is it like small, let's do the small thing? Or, how do you approach this? How do you approach innovation in learning at these companies?
I think it's a combination of both. It's for me, it's about understanding what's the business strategy and the business context and what really matters. How does your business get results? and how does what you're doing make a difference,
Right.
and being able to link those, and being really picky about the big things that you work on as a result,
Right.
and where most of your bang for buck is going. Setting up good governance, so good decision making with business leaders, calling the shots.
Right.
I always try not to be the one who's calling the shots on what we work on and what we invest in, but to work with a team of business leaders to say what's important to the business. But then it's about being super opportunistic and looking for those moments when it's like, I know we can do things better, here's the opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, so when I was at Coca-Cola Amatil, one big opportunity that came my way, which initially wasn't, the national engineering manager came to me and said, I've got this one engineer who's going to retire. He knows everything about the business, been here 40 years. Can you shadow him, get someone to shadow him and write down everything he knows and turns it into courses and documents? Now, over 6 weeks, we worked through that and we decided it was a knowledge management issue and an opportunity to go into a community of practice and to connect our people better across all of our sites around maintenance. So that was, it took me a little while to get him on board, but he's like, yeah, I'll give it a go. So there's an opportunity.
So how?
Sorry, yeah, with a project that big, how did you determine where to start? Like, you can have a massive project and there's so many stakeholders and people involved. Do you sort of go to all the business leaders and ask each of them individually, or was it sort of a big room?
Often it's where you get the support, right? So I'd been wanting to do something with social learning, continuous learning, to shift from training to more sustainable approaches, empowering people to learn. And that's one of my big things, is around social and collaborative approaches and sustaining continuous learning.
Yeah.
So I set up what I called a governance board, which was my senior business leader group.
It's from the same company, or?
Yeah, within Coca-Cola Amatil, who I said basically once a quarter I met with them, I said, here's the stuff we're working on, here's the stuff I've been asked to work on, here's what I think is going to make a difference to the business. Are you okay for me to work on this stuff and not on this stuff? And it's like, so they were like the strategic decision making. They always knew what I was working on. But the other thing I did, I went to them, I set up a new technical academy, and after a year and a half, met the agenda around, we'd made all these big investments, new automated warehouse management systems, SAP, manufacturing equipment, and we were reliant at the time on overseas vendors to keep training our people. It's like, well, we can't have that. So I set up the learning pathways, ticked that box, satisfied the business, showed them we could do good stuff. Then I went to them and said, look, there's a whole stack of potential that is not being unlocked here, and that's your people learning from each other, learning from experience, and us enabling skills across the business for learning and helping to connect people and making it easy for them to discover each other and share their knowledge. I said, can we put that on the agenda, basically? So we officially updated our organisational learning strategy, and then it was a matter of finding the opportunities. So I got sort of the high level endorsement in principle, directional, but then it's like, where are the opportunities? Who can I work with? Who gets this?
Yeah.
Because you still need that groundswell of people to manifest the vision, right?
Yeah.
So was it a technological thing? Was it really just moving?
There was a bit of technology, but it was more about people. And I don't know if you know Helen Blunden. She goes under the handle Activate Learn.
Right.
Activate Learning is her business. And she was someone who blogged a lot, and I was aware of her through her blogging. I knew how she worked, and I reached out to her and said, I want you to come in and help me do some setup work on this.
Right.
So we did a piece of basically human-centred analysis where we went out to different sites, had a look at how the people we wanted to connect were actually working. What sort of tools, tech did they use? Who were they connected to? Who did they reach out to? Who did they have conversations with? What did they talk about? How did they get better at their job? How did they solve problems? And here's something I've found. If you ask someone, how do you learn, they automatically default to training courses. If you ask someone, how do you get better at your job? How do you solve problems? How do you improve your practices? That's all learning, that's real learning, and they give you different answers.
Right.
That's interesting.
And what's the key theme that comes out of that different answers?
So the key theme is we learn by doing things, we learn by asking other people for help if we don't know what we're doing. We learn by swapping resources, exchanging things. And what we found amongst this group, and these are like maintenance guys, these are guys on the tools, not sitting at desks, there was a real willingness to share what they knew and share their practices, and a real curiosity about what other people did.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we started with that, and we went back to the National Engineering Manager and said, look, we think there's something here, and we want to support these guys to connect. So we set up what we called the Work, Connect and Learn program, which was like a 5-week MOOC, if you like, a sort of guided social learning program.
So they don't have to get off their job, they just...
Well, we wanted to build habits of being able to share as they went.
Right.
Yeah. So if they've got a problem with a piece of equipment and they can't figure it out and they don't have the the skill set or background on their site to figure it out, how can they connect with others quickly and readily, and then how can they share easily what they've learnt and share any resources they've developed. So some of it was tech, and we had SharePoint, so that's what we worked with.
Hey, that's a robust little tool.
It is, and a lot of people kind of poo-poo it. If you're at least on SharePoint 2013, you've got something you can work with for collaboration.
I mean, we've heard of other companies who, use SharePoint in a better way than most companies set it up. So
I made it my business to step into the SharePoint space. That's another story, right?
Because everybody
so
has
I took ownership. I took ownership of SharePoint.
Right.
We went through this kind of a different story. But anyway, let me finish the work connect and learn, because I think this is a really good example of how to connect people. So we ran it for 5 weeks. Each week we ran a webinar. We ran 2 because we had night shift as well, and we recorded it. They had a little bit of pre-work, maybe go and look at this resource. Go and post on this forum about the top 5 maintenance issues at your site. So we got them sharing and connecting in that way. We started off with, here's how to use the tools on tech, just to get them comfortable. Then we went to, look, why connect with other people anyway? So the first session was all about the why. Why be part of a network? Why be part of a community? What's in it for you? And then we went on to how to connect with other people. So we got everyone to set up their SharePoint profile. We showed them how to search for other people. How to find other people with similar interests, because there's a lot, you can do a full profile search on SharePoint. So if people have their projects and their experience and knowledge up, you can find people. It's all about making things discoverable. And then the next week, we started talking about problem solving. And so we took the answers to what are the top 5 issues at your site, and we said, go and find someone else who shares those issues and work on that problem together over the next week. So we got them working straight away on real world stuff and seeing the value of it straight away. So kind of went through that program for 5 weeks.
How much evangelizing was needed though to get them actioning that, or was it?
The managers are key, right? And if I were to do this again, I would do it a little bit different. We went big bang. We went managers and team members all in the one hit. I would do managers first to get them really comfortable with it and seeing the value of it, because people respond to the tap on the shoulder from their managers, in terms of who influences you to learn. I don't know if you know Towards Maturity, they do a lot of really good research. I've been researching for 15 years how learning really happens in organisations.
We'll put these links in the notes below.
Did you spend a lot of time, so when you're going through big changes and making these things, there's probably a few key areas that you're improving. Did you use much data, or how did you justify, or how did you see that things were improving?
I did not use much data. No. But we use business data. So I formed this long-term relationship with the senior leaders in my business, right? And I knew each of them well. There weren't that many of them. I built relationships. I understood their KPIs. I could read their monthly reports. Sometimes went to some of their meetings. I knew what mattered to them.
So you could see things improve.
And I set up relationships with them. So the national maintenance manager, I knew that improving machine downtime was one of these key strategic goals. So we tracked that. We had conversations and said, what are we doing with skilling up your people to address this?
But that's the right data, right? Like that's the right change you want to see. I mean, there's no point, like I get a lot of, 20 people did the course. I was like, so what? Right. So
we didn't do much training to make the improvement. What we did was we did a sort of a capability analysis. So we went out and we had a look at the skill set of everyone, and then we pulled all that data together. So here's how we use data, and we said, okay, across the capabilities that we've defined that people need, where do we have gaps that lots of people have? How are we going to address those? Okay, so we did a little bit of training, but then where do we have pockets of gaps where we have some people who are really skilled and some people who aren't so skilled? Can we buddy them up? Can we get the skilled people to run some webinars, create some resources? So rather than us run training courses, can we connect people better or get the people themselves to build the resources,
But that's almost blasphemous to like learning and development people,
Is it?
right? Like, well,
I don't know.
Stop doing training courses.
Seems smart to me.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's like training courses are slow. They're slow to build. They're slow to roll out. You connect people, and the people who know their stuff, and yet you need to make sure that people know their stuff.
It's probably excellent for culture as well. Around the business.
Everyone
knows
talking to
each
people.
Other, everyone sort of collaborates better.
And how did you get? Obviously, there was you have to convince people that hey, training's gone.
Well,
And-
training wasn't completely gone, and I would never say training needs to go.
Right.
It's just about using it appropriately,
Right.
right? And where it's the best solution, use it. But where it's not the best solution, then don't use it. You
I
know,
imagine
use
for,
other
like,
methods.
qualifications and stuff that
Yeah.
require a test or something is different.
Well, I think novices, although with novices, if you've got a really good, I'll call it a buddy system, but
Yeah.
one of the things I always do is really have a look at the on-the-job training and what's happening with it, and how can we tweak that. And often it's a matter of something as simple as, if you're a person that we ask to buddy train a lot, I'm going to spend 6 hours with you in a skill instruction and demonstration course, right? So you know how to do it properly, and I can trust that you know how to do it properly. And hey, I'm going to give you some lesson plans. I'm going to work those up. We'll get some experts to work those up. No content, just when you bring someone new onto this piece of equipment, here's the stuff you need to run through them with them, yeah? And make sure they can do. Simple, right?
That's right.
Not content heavy. Doesn't take a lot to maintain. Simple stuff that give you a big shift. So it's about looking, as you said, Dan, sometimes for these small changes that have a big impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the SharePoint thing.
The SharePoint thing. Okay. I think IT
I'm
thought
very
all the
curious.
Christmases would come at once,
That's
right?
right.
So just touch. 2014, I decided it was time I got across this social networking
Right.
thing. I was sick of going to conferences and having people say, who's on Twitter? And I never put my hand up. You know, and people sort of, just a handful of people almost proselytising, saying you should be on Twitter, you should be out there networking.
Which they still
awesome
do,
for learning.
right?
Yeah. So I joined one of Jane Hart's courses. She runs a Modern Workplace Learning Centre. It was called Becoming a Social Learning Practitioner. So it's a 14-week program. First week, set up a blog. So I set up a blog. And I blogged about setting up a blog. Second week, get on Twitter and go join a Twitter chat. And blog about that. And it's like, so I started my blog in 2014. I got on Twitter and started actively networking and kind of seeing this whole other world. And it's just, it flipped my professional development and like the whole way I work on my career on its head. And I thought, this is gold, right? How can I, what does this look like in an organisational context? And I started poking around, what tools do we have? And we had SharePoint 2010. I learned we were going to upgrade to 2013, got online, had a look at what can you do in 2013. It's like, you can do a lot more with social. You can do forums, you can set up direct, all sorts of stuff. So I contacted IT and I said, look, I'm a bit concerned about the way we've got SharePoint set up at the moment.
How would they set it up at that stage? It was mostly just content dumps, right?
It completely replicated the physical infrastructure of the business, and nearly everything was private. So for instance, you imagine a production site, you've got a manufacturing team, you've got you know, a maintenance team, you've got a quality team. So we had, you know, maybe say 8 manufacturing sites, all had separate sites locked down to the people at that site with sub-sites for each of these functions. So no interconnection, right? Just completely replicated the physical infrastructure. No connection happening. And just, really, I had a look at all the document libraries. It's like everyone obviously got told to dump everything in there.
And no governance around how
no governance, no governance.
Okay.
So I said, okay, you know, are you happy, IT, for me to be a change agent and kind of do the governance for my business unit? And they're like, go for it.
Let's see what you can do.
So I bit off a lot there, but I thought it would be worth it. It is kind of like nobody told me it wasn't my job. And I think that's the thing, like sometimes just like if you see an opportunity, don't wait for someone to say it's your job. Just
but what was it though? Was it changing the people? Obviously, because using SharePoint is a whole other process in itself.
So,
did you have to change the humans? Or was it the...
It's all of it.
Right.
So I changed infrastructure.
Right.
So when we went to 2013, and this was the bit that took a lot, because people couldn't get their heads around why I would say, no, don't have a site for your physical location. Have one manufacturing site and all of the manufacturing teams share that.
Right.
You can have a site for your physical location as well, but you use it for different things.
Right.
But in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of looking at process standardisation, unless all of manufacturing is on the one site, and by default, from now on, I'm approving any site.
Right.
I took over ownership of site approvals, and every site by default is going to be public unless you can mount a good case as to why it should be locked down. Because it's all about transparency, it's openness, connection. So
how did that go down? especially with the managers.
Security.
Some people got it
Right.
initially. I had to spend a lot of time initially with the senior leadership team to get them across the line. Fortunately, my business unit director was all over it, and he's like, yeah, it makes so much sense, just do
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So I had his sort of seal of approval. But then there was a lot of conversations with all these management teams, right? And then I had to form, you know, a team of champions. In addition to your day job, find people who are influencers
That's
on
right, because
sites
they're the ones who will
to
drive
work
it.
with
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
because we had to basically get everyone to move documents, to do cleanups on documents, to shift to this new structure. And then it was about the human side as well. So what does this mean? How do you use this? So there's a lot of comms around that. That Work, Connect and Learn program I talked about, we converted that into a self-directed online program, which we ran out of SharePoint. No tracking in LMS, but we knew who was doing it. You know, we'd set up flags. And we encouraged people to go and do that because it would help them to understand. And we also ran, you know, some training sessions and some drop-in sessions as we went live with 2013.
So it became your life for how long?
Yeah. Well, I took.
I mean,
my team took permanent ownership at that point of SharePoint.
Right.
Yeah.
So the learning development team at that stage took ownership of the governance and standards of SharePoint.
For our business unit.
Right.
Yeah, not for the whole of the organisation,
Okay.
but just for our business unit, because I wanted to use it as a connection and collaboration platform to promote continuous learning.
So from a percentage perspective, how many people, obviously I'm assuming you had an LMS, but you had an LMS back then and you were pumping content out?
Did we have an LMS back then? We had multiple LMSs being used
So what was the
in different
percentage
places.
that this thing started getting used compared to?
Well, we were just in the process of a new LMS
Right.
being implemented.
So it's always hard.
But you know what was really hard was these conversations I was having with other learning and development leaders in the business, in other business units around, you don't need to put everything in the LMS. So people were saying, we're going to run a lunch and learn, let's record it in the LMS. It's like, well, why? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I was wanting to run some like campaign style approaches, micro learning campaign style approaches, and I wanted to use, and I did use MailChimp for that.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I had this really hard time with a couple of the other learning and development leaders explaining why I was doing this. Like, why would you do that? Why would you just pump out content in the LMS?
Did you ever ask them, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, they struggled to get their head around it. So you know what's really interesting now, because I'm not inside an organisation, I work independently with multiple organisations. I see a shift in the conversation in Australia around what our job is in learning and development, how we work, and there's this real aspiration to become more business partners rather than order takers, and you've probably heard that language,
that's
right?
Yeah.
And I actually ran with Arun Pradhan earlier this year, I ran a public workshop program called From Order Taker to Performance Partner. So we had 90 people from L&D teams around Australia come to those.
So you're leading that conversation now, essentially.
Yeah, I'm doing my best to lead it. For me now, it's all about transformation and repositioning learning and development to be highly relevant, value-adding business partners.
Innovation is hard, and clearly you're doing a lot of this, right? So how do you, there's obviously a lot of failures attached to it, right? So you've gone in saying, I want to do this, really innovative, and you get shot down. So how do you personally deal with that, I won't say rejection, but that failure, that step back?
You know what, it's not rejection, it's one conversation closer to change.
Right.
Like, change happens one conversation at a time.
Starts with denial.
Yeah, and sometimes, well, you know, that first conversation where someone says no, you might have shifted them from being totally unaware that there was a different way to having some awareness. And you plant seeds, and you just keep planting the seeds, and you just keep planting the seeds.
So it's just you have more patience than the other?
I think there's both when I work internally and externally and looking for organisations who are ready for transformation, it's about having these conversations and kind of prodding here and prodding there and finding where the stretch is, right? And finding where you can take people that one extra step. And occasionally you find someone who wants to make the big leap, and that's really exciting. But often it's just that one little step at a time, be it with an internal stakeholder or with me for looking for organisations who are ready to make bigger shifts. Who can I work with? Who's ready to work with me? Where can I add value? And I never take it personally. It's not personal, you know?
Right.
It's about me finding the right connection at the right point in time with the right opportunity and the right people. That's all it is. You got to have a lot of conversations to get there, but you just got to keep having the conversations. I put out a lot of content to support the shift in conversation.
Tell us more about that. The content generation is becoming a big part of your life now. And are you finding that getting the message out is easier now with all the technologies and you've got a podcast and you've got the blog.
Yeah.
What was that shift? Because you've been really good at one-on-one conversations, with the senior leaders and stuff. Now you're one-to-many. What are the similarities or differences you're finding, or which one's better? Like how?
Yeah, I started having one-to-many conversations when I was still at Coke.
Right.
So I think I started conference speaking in 2015. I was blog writing, and a lot of that was working out loud, right? Which I think is hugely powerful. And the more people who are doing that, the better off we all are in terms of knowledge sharing and growing and connecting. So I was used to, speaking at live events, webinars, and so on. But early this year, I embarked on a 7-month road trip, which is a different story altogether again.
Right. And was it I just want to take a break from everything, or was it I'm going to go on a road trip?
Yeah, it was like life needs to be different
Oh,
for
right.
myself and my daughter.
Right.
And I didn't know what different looked like,
Right.
and I needed to give myself space for the two of us
Right.
to figure out what different looked like. So I've just completely reshaped my business this year.
Oh, interesting.
And I did it by basically cutting the umbilical cord to what I was doing and just getting rid of most of my stuff and hitting the road with my daughter.
Could you have done that without taking the time off, or was the time
It would
off
have been
really
harder.
good?
It was about, so I was living in Sydney, right? Sydney is mighty expensive.
Yeah.
Yep, it's mighty congested.
Yeah.
So I was working, I've worked for 14 months on a strategic contract with Qantas.
Right.
I needed to be working on those big, high-paying contracts to pay my rent, basically. I'm not going to tell you how much I was paying rent, but it was rude.
Yeah.
And I was-
Sydney.
It was killing
horror
me.
stories
And my
about
daughter's health was suffering
Yeah.
through problems at school, academically, socially. The school wasn't meeting her needs, and I thought I found myself. Language is so powerful, and the messages we send other people so powerful. I found myself sending her messages along the lines of, "Oh, honey, when you start work, you're going to have managers that you don't like, just like there's some teachers you don't think can teach you. There'll be some managers who can't manage properly. There'll be people that you have to work with that you really don't have much respect for. And this is good training. Just suck it up and figure out how to handle this." And I
Right.
sat back and I thought, what am I telling this
Yeah,
child?
yeah.
What message? And I had this whole weekend, sort of like this epiphany, where I really thought hard about what's important in my life, how's it going, and what message do I want to be sending my teenage daughter.
right.
And I thought the message I want to send her is you have choice.
Yeah.
You can
This is
create.
true.
You can create
Yes,
your life.
yeah.
You are never stuck.
Yeah.
Like it's up to you. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, what are we going to do here?
Right.
What are we going to do here? So, yeah, over the course of a weekend, I'd had a cousin who'd gone travelling with
Yeah.
his 2 young kids for around Australia for a year, and I thought the travelling option
Yeah.
sounds good. I wanted to get her out of a schoolyard for a year, but still do her education.
Yeah.
So I struck on distance education, and there was a whole heap of categories you could meet.
Right.
Like in Queensland, in Australia, you can opt into distance ed. Everywhere else, you have to meet categories. So it's like, do I want her to commit a felony and end up in prison? Probably not.
Right.
Is she ready for elite sports? Probably not. Do I want her to be a pregnant teenager? Probably not. Okay, do I want to live remotely? Probably not. Do I want to travel? Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
let's hit the road.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful place to travel.
So we hit the road. So we left Sydney. I got rid of nearly everything I owned. We moved out of our apartment in January. We didn't know how long we were going to be travelling or where
And
we
how
would
long was
stop.
that time frame between? What's that lead time between deciding and on the road?
About 4 months.
That's pretty swift.
Yeah, the hardest part of the whole thing was getting rid of my stuff because I didn't want to just throw it out. I wanted to be responsible and digitising everything. I had a pile of journals, like paper journals this high. I scanned the lot.
Wow.
I can't tell you how many bottles of red wine it took me to get through that scanning.
You might find as well they have the what is it? Those digital. They convert your handwriting now to
Yeah,
text.
yeah. I just scanned it into Evernote and it's all fully
it?
searchable.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that's
anyway,
good.
yeah. So bringing me back to the content thing,
Yeah.
right? So it was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to work more remotely. I want to be able to work from anywhere. That was my goal. So how can I do that? And I need to make a living. So my goal while travelling was to make enough money to cover the accommodation, which, by the way, living 7 months in Airbnb was cheaper than my rent in Sydney.
No.
Yeah.
Jeez, how much were you? Jeez, okay.
More
Right,
than I should
right,
have, and I wasn't
right,
paying over market.
right.
So I'd always wanted to do a podcast. Like it had been nagging at me in the back
Yeah.
of my head, and I've been trying to resist it, thinking, do I really need to take the work on? Because a podcast doesn't make money.
But did people tell you that, hey, I think you should do a podcast? Did people constantly come in?
No.
Right. So
No.
you really just want to put your ideas out there?
Well, yeah. And I sort of had some vague ideas about what I wanted to do, but then I got talking to an industry colleague, Karen Maloney, And we were talking, we were at the AITD award dinner 2 years ago, like November 2017, and we got talking, and she said, I want to do a podcast. And I'm like, no way, I want to do a podcast too. Let's have a chat about that.
Right.
And we were both worried about the amount of work, but we wanted to be storytellers. We wanted to get people's stories out there and to have guests from Australia and New Zealand who are working inside organisations doing great stuff that people didn't know about, and to really promote the idea of, you know, pockets of good practice, innovation, things that people were doing differently. And we figured between us we knew enough people. We found another person, Amanda Ashby, who was willing to do all the editing and all the technical side. So, you know, all I had to do was find people to talk to and have these conversations.
Yeah.
Although I've since learnt the editing as backup,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I can
yeah,
do the
yeah.
whole thing, but
Yeah.
thank God for Amanda.
Yeah.
So we've had some great conversations, and we just dig out people who are doing great stuff.
And how long ago was the decision to quit generic life to?
So this is the second time I've worked for myself.
Right.
So when I left the Air Force, I kind of worked for a few organisations, and I was with I won't name them, I was with a big financial services organisation when I went on maternity leave. My daughter's about to turn 14. And when I was on maternity leave, they had a big global restructure, got rid of half the management positions at my level. And I thought, do I want to go back to that?
Yeah,
Because the work didn't get cut, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, my goal is not to climb corporate ladders.
Yeah.
My goal is to do a little good,
Yeah.
you know, make a little difference, do work with people who want to be progressive and that I enjoy working with. I thought I can do that for myself. I think I can do this.
So
I
how
just
long has it
kinda
been
took the
now?
leap.
How long has it been since the shift?
So
And how's it going?
it's going, at the moment it's going amazing. But it's like there was fits and starts, right? So initially I contracted through someone else, through a small consulting firm. Then I found they were on charging 30%.
Yeah.
And I went back to them and said, that doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah.
So we renegotiated, and then I thought, you know what, I can find my own work. You know, I'm good enough, I've got a good enough network, and you know, I've never been out of work. So I then went and worked for myself probably for about 3 years, and then Coca-Cola Amatil contacted me and said, we want someone who's got supply chain background. Now I was logistics in the Air Force,
that's right.
I hadn't touched it for 10 years, but it was still there, and understands training. We want to set up this technical academy. We've been looking for a year for someone to set up a technical academy for us in supply chain. So I went in on a 6-week contract.
As you do.
Did the design work around what this thing looked like, the change management plan, and they were struggling to find someone to lead it. So I just went to him, and I said, after 3 months, I was still there starting the implementation. I said, look, I want to see this through. He said, I can't pay you the rates I've been paying you. I said, no, I'm offering to join as an employee. He's like, yeah, let's do it. So,
fantastic.
so that's how I got to kind of build this whole thing, and it was without trivialising it, because it wasn't trivial, it was a playground. I got to try lots of ideas, experiment, I built up trust in this environment. So I kept going, you know, for 4 years with that, and then I got to a point of, well, things were shifting in terms of internal restructures and managers moving on. Nothing lasts forever, and I thought, well, I've done some good here. I've learnt a stack of stuff, met some great people, it's time to move on.
Yeah.
So I quit that job, and the day before I quit, I got a call from someone to say, you're going to get a call from Qantas.
Oh, right. So it was just like...
I've just been speaking to the
Yeah, right.
executive HR manager, and they want to do some transformation work, and they don't want a big corporate in there. They want someone who can roll their sleeves up and really get into the organisation. So I kind of fell into the Qantas thing. I said to them, give me a month off, and I'll start with you. And what was interesting, I started there, and the brief was, tell us what's happening in learning and development across our airlines, because we don't know. We don't know how many people are working in L&D, we don't know where they're working, what they're doing, what it's costing us. So it started that way. So I worked that way, but this year what's happened is I've just completely reshaped the way I work. So I do some consulting gigs, but they're more kind of mentoring and guidance, and I'll work with you over time. I like to say I bring the outside in. I'll bring you the latest research, the latest trends, what's working. I've recently formed a partnership with Towards Maturity in the UK to bring their services into Australia. They do a lot with research around strategic intelligence, around what works in learning and learner intelligence. They've had something like 55,000 learners work through their learning survey. So it's good research, it's good benchmarking, it works. I've also had the opportunity this year, I was looking for the opportunity to build some relationships with professional associations. So the Learning and Performance Institute in the UK have a capability map for learning and development professionals. So I led a project to refresh that. So from Australia, we ended up working with 50 leading L&D thinkers and practitioners around the world. Online collaboration, we did a lot through Slack. I formed working groups with these people, and we completely refreshed their capability map.
How big is those projects though? Like, how much time does that take for you to do that?
I reckon when you work online, it takes less time than when you work face to face. It's like I think you can do things, in my experience, a lot more efficiently in virtual teams if you know how to work with virtual teams. And we're working more and more with them, but I think we're not skilling people up well enough.
Yeah.
Right. There is a lot of
Yeah.
So tell me about the hustle. Clearly, you're really in there.
Yeah.
Right? You're trying many different things and seeing, like obviously experimenting a lot.
Yeah.
When does the hustle get exhausting?
2 weeks ago.
Right.
It gets exhausting when I'm just trying to cram too much in, right? Yeah.
And what's your gauge? What's your own personal gauge of? I think it's now time to slow down.
It's just if I get tired. Yeah. If I get I'm really into kind of looking after myself as well.
Right.
Sleep is critical.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm starting to cut short on sleep, like I had a day 2 weeks ago, I was in Sydney for a few events. And I was also working on a couple of proposals where I was having to liaise with the UK to put these proposals together for Australian clients, right? So I wake up at 5 a.m. Naturally, I'm up at 5 a.m. So I work mornings. I go to bed fairly early, like 9:30ish. So I was up at 5. I worked on a couple of proposals until 7:30. I went to an event that started at 8, an all-day hackathon. Chief Learning Officer hackathon.
Ooh,
I left that. It was good fun. Yeah. I left that at 5 o'clock. I went to the launch of some research by Good Practice, and there was lots of people I hadn't seen for a long time. Lots of networking. So I left that at 8:30. I went back and I jumped on a call with the UK at 9 o'clock.
Right.
That ended at 10, and then at 10:30 I went to bed. And the next morning I got up at 6 and I went out and worked for half a day on site with a client at a hospital. It's like, that's obviously too much, right? I can do that in short stints. But then I had a weekend off, and then I had a really slow week the following week. Yeah.
That's why we've come to Australia.
Yeah. Well, it's a good place to relax, right?
It is.
And this area, plug for Brisbane, plug for Queensland, gorgeous area.
It was ultimately relaxing. The idea was to do nothing, just unwind and.
Do you do nothing? Can you do nothing?
We did it for 2 days, 3 days. We said do nothing, and we did it. And not even go to theme parks and just sit on the beach.
Oh,
do
so
nothing.
nice.
So tell me a last question, right? What is your biggest challenge that you're facing now, either through your podcasting, or what's the thing that's taking up the most of your time?
Yeah, like for me,
the thing that you've not figured out yet, and it's there.
So I feel like I'm on the cusp of a shift with my business. I don't want to employ people, but just building my network, my support network. So right now I'm doing a lot of marketing, a lot of business development, as you say, a lot of content. I make a monthly What I Learned This Month video as a way of role modelling that as a practice. And just letting people know what I've been doing. I've got the podcast, I'm blog writing, I vlog on Snapchat daily.
Have you got to watch that? We're going to see that?
It's quite good fun. So I'm actually going home today after this conversation to write up a job description for an assistant, and I'll just engage someone through an agency. But I think I'm at the point now where I know my processes well enough, and I'm much clearer than I was 12 months ago on what's my service offering.
Right, because you've codified it now, you know the drill.
And I kind of know what's worked. So I've got this partnership with Towards Maturity. I'm doing more work with the Learning and Performance Institute. So having refreshed the capabilities map, I'm now doing team assessments with it.
Right.
So it's like I've figured out what my jigsaw puzzle looks like and how I can add value and work flexibly. So now it's about getting someone on board who can...
Getting it done.
So capacity is my challenge at the moment,
cool. That's a good problem to have.
It is, and continuing the conversations, like finding people who are ready to do the kind of work I'm ready to support with them with.
So when you come to New Zealand?
I'm hoping to run a workshop in New Zealand mid-year. But I would like to get over to New Zealand sooner. I'm talking to a few people in New Zealand.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, you know where to hang out.
Yeah.
People
I
to
do,
hang out
and I
with.
know which airline to fly
That's
to, right?
right. All right, thank you, Michelle,
thank
for being
you.
on the show. And if people need to find you, I'm sure we'll put the details in the bottom of this video.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Great to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you.
Finally.